Hello, and welcome to the Sustainability Leaders Podcast, part of the Jobs with Impact compendium of resources for people who want to make a positive impact on the world. I'm David Rosenheim, your host. Every week, we bring you in-depth conversations with people who are leading the way to a sustainable future. I hope these conversations will be as inspiring to you as they are to me, and most of all, I hope that they'll empower you to take action. The planet needs you. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to jobswithimpact.com. This episode is part of the California Leadership Series, where we focus on changemakers in California government who are shaping the most innovative energy and climate policy anywhere, transforming the world's fifth largest economy and beyond. Our sustainable business sponsor for the California Leadership Series is Lyft. Lyft is the fastest growing rideshare company in the U.S. and is available to 95% of the U.S. population. Lyft is preferred by drivers and passengers for its reliable and friendly experience and its commitment to effecting positive change for the future of our cities as the first rideshare company to launch a carbon offset program. And now, all Lyft rides are carbon neutral. To learn more, visit lyft.com/carbon. I had the pleasure of sitting down with Eduardo Garcia in his office in the California State Capitol on a typically sweltering summer day in Sacramento. If you haven't been to the Capitol building, you have to allow a bit of extra time, first to get through security and then to navigate the building itself, which is really a disjointed fusion of two buildings, the old and the new. But Mr. Garcia is a gracious host and made us feel right at home as he sat down for our discussion behind his large, dark wood desk. Assemblymember Garcia represents California's 56th district, including the Coachella Valley, where he is from and served as Coachella City's first elected mayor at the age of just 29 back in 2006. I first got to know Garcia in 2015 in Paris, while we were both attending COP21, and where we had the pleasure of witnessing the coalescing of the Paris Climate Agreement. Eduardo has emerged at the head of a new generation of climate leaders in the California State Legislature and has done a lot to broaden the environmental tent beyond the historically white male-dominant paradigm. He's held many bills that are critical to our environment, including Senate Bill 32 and AB 197, the historic climate change package that established California's landmark emission reduction mandate of 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. Eduardo is a person of unique perspective and focused determination to do what's right for people and the planet, and I think you'll enjoy his story and our conversation. So, Assemblymember Garcia, thank you for joining the podcast.
Well, good.
It's nice to see you again.
Good day. Good to see you. It's always a pleasure to be able to have a good conversation about climate, the environment, sustainability, and the role that we have here in California that's important to the entire world.
It certainly is, especially now, and I want to talk more about California's leadership in a little bit. But I want to start back to your beginnings. And are you actually from Coachella?
I'm born and raised in the Coachella Valley. My parents are from the border town of Mexicali, which is the capital of Baja California, 90 miles away. They decided to settle in the Coachella Valley after going up and down the state of California, working in the fields. And Coachella seemed to be a place that allowed for other opportunities beyond working in the fields and close enough to family, 90 miles away from their hometown, Mexicali.
And what sort of work did they do?
So they worked in the fields, everything from picking lettuce, tomatoes, broccoli, just about everything grows out in Imperial County, 365 days of the year, and would follow the season all the way up to Salinas year round. And so today, my parents, my dad is retiring from Public Works Department in the city of Indio, and my mother has owned a small business for about 25 years, cleaning homes in the Coachella Valley, and that's what put food on the table, a roof over our head, and clothes on our back. And so, but that's the beginnings. They came to this country to work and to provide greater opportunities to myself and my brother.
And tell me a little bit about your childhood.
Sure.
There. I mean, and I'm interested to know sort of just generally about your childhood, but when did the idea of environments or the experience? Maybe it was an
Sure.
experience before the idea sort of come to you.
Well, look, our household has always been conscientious, whether it was from the economic side or the environmental side, right? Hey, don't waste water, aside from it being a precious resource because it costs, right?
Yeah.
It costs money, right? Hey, listen, those cans go in that box and the plastics go in that one, right? And, I mean, without it being very intentional, I think it was just kind of a natural practice in our upbringing, in our household.
Sort of an extension of frugality.
Being resourceful, right? And being resourceful, knowing that if you collected enough of those cans, you may get, $50 to go buy a new pair of shoes, but because you did that, right? And so, kind of a self-incentivized motive there. But really, for me, growing up in Coachella, it's a community that's predominantly Latino, 98% Latino of Mexican origin. Many people of first generation who arrive in the area and really make it their place of being and raising their families. I grew up there, went to public schools, elementary, middle school, high school, was someone who attended the community college. I used to say far longer than I like to admit. I was there for 4 years. After learning there are people that have been there longer, I'm not embarrassed to say I was there for 4 years, but an important experience for me to be able to really enforce or reinforce the opportunities that were out there beyond the community college. And so I always tell people that's where I really learned how to read and write to go on to the university. My experience growing up in town was one of kind of mixed, circumstances. I grew up in a neighborhood that wasn't, very peaceful. We had a neighborhood that had a lot of activity going on, daytime, after hours, and so there were a lot of rough circumstances and situations that we had to navigate through growing up. At the age of 12, one of my closest friends, was shot and killed due to gang violence, right? And that was the first time that in your face as a 12-year-old, you actually suffer the loss of someone who you were, growing up with due to a violent, act. And so I can tell you that at the age of, 14 and 15, there were many tempting times in which it was probably easier to go one way than the other, but thanks to parents and other peers, as well as a number of teachers who were on us, we were able to steer away from some of those situations that could have really ended up bad. I mean, the young boy who I grew up with that lived across the street from me at the age of 17 ended up in juvenile hall and is someone who has been in and out of the state, penitentiary system. And so that's kind of the environment that we grew up in. And I got to admit that, I didn't grow up, with a very, smooth path and kind of a spoon in our mouth. It was a tough upbringing, but the love and, the care of my parents and their discipline. And at times when I used to say, oh, man, I wish my mom was like his mom or her mom, or my dad let me do this or that. In retrospect, I'm very grateful to those moments and times when they said no.
Yeah, to have had those boundaries that kept you safe. Right?
Absolutely. And so if it wasn't for that, I really don't think that the opportunities that came soon after, my teenage years would have presented themselves. I wasn't the best student in school, C average student. I knew that I needed to at least have a 2.0 to play sports. I loved playing soccer, I loved playing baseball and football, and I was part of all of those activities, growing up from the age of 7 to, my high school years. And in order to participate, you had to have the grade. So I always did enough.
Right.
I always did enough. But, I hung out with the students that were very competitive, the students that were in the AP classes, in the honor classes. Although I wasn't on that path, I was there very close, witnessing their discipline, their commitment to their studies, and, of course, the way that they had set goals and objectives for themselves. I was a student that was just happy to get by, and couldn't wait to get out of high school, couldn't wait to leave mom and dad's home.
Where did you think you were going to go? What was sort of your idea of what your future looked like at that point?
So I knew that I needed to graduate from high school, and this is at a time, and we still have some achievement gaps there that we are working on to make sure that everyone graduates from high school and has an option either to go to higher education or to pick up some kind of vocational, opportunity. I thought that I could graduate from high school. I could end up managing a place, whether it was in the hospitality industry, because I had gotten a little flavor of that kind of work in the area as a student. I thought maybe I could also pursue a career somewhere within the law enforcement arena, not necessarily a police officer. There were other things that required some kind of vocational certificate, program. Community college classwork, and then, hey, you get a job, right? And those were areas that kind of motivated me. I also, as a result of an experience at the age of 16, 17 in high school, did an internship at City Hall in Coachella, and my job was to videotape city council meetings. And there was this crazy idea that I could someday maybe be the mayor. And it was a crazy idea, given that I wasn't, someone that was pursuing higher education in the area of government or politics. It was just, hey, I can do that, right? After a long summer of videotaping these meetings, hearing what was happening or not. But I wasn't too sure what the path to getting there was, right?
Yeah.
I recall asking the question to 5 of the council members, as a teenager, and saying, hey, what did you do to get here or get there? And the answers were everything but what I expected, right? Maybe, hey, well, you got to go to college and you got to study business, you got to study, government, you got to get involved in the community. It was like, oh, well, my family's been here for a long time, and we've owned a local business out here, and a lot of people know us, and we ran for office and got elected. Or, I got involved because there was a problem at City Hall. They weren't giving me a permit, and I figured I'd take it upon myself to make something happen, and I decided to run for office. And those were the kinds of responses versus one that you would expect. And there's no right or wrong answer, I guess. But, someone in high school would expect an adult in that position of leadership would say, well, first of all, young man or young lady, you need to finish high school and you need to pursue a college education in these areas, and you need to, do community service and get involved in the community. It was everything but that.
It was more sort of that participatory democracy actually was alive.
Exactly. There. And so for me, there was a seed planted, right? But never thinking that would actually become a real opportunity for us. And so, our upbringing, as I mentioned, we graduated from high school. All of the thoughts of, I can't wait to get out of mom's house. I can't wait. Those were all just false, ideas in our own head, realizing that, I had a little job working at the Desert Springs Marriott, where my job was we were guest services agent, and we used to drive people in a cool little golf cart from the condos to the main resort there in Palm Desert. We were making $15 an hour plus tips. We were going to school part-time. I lived at home. I had a decent little car. I had no other obligations but to go to school part-time and work full-time. I was living the life, right? Until my mom one day says, listen, buddy, I remember you were saying you couldn't wait to leave. I also have noticed that, you're, and this is a true story. She says you're out all night and sleep half the day, and in between maybe you're going to school or not. She says this isn't going to fly for much longer either. You're going to kind of step up your role with the school, given that all of your friends have taken off to university and they're getting close to finishing, and you're still trying to figure out what you're up to here. Or you're going to be the adult that you kind of are projecting or pretending to be and go out on your own and do your own thing. And vaya con Dios, and, God bless you kind of a message. And that was very eye-opening because that was telling me, look, I'm at an intersection here, not only just here at home, but also in terms of what I need to, begin laying out as a path for myself. And I was motivated by that conversation and the fact that many of my high school peers were midway through their college journeys and saying, what about me? And the one thing that sticks from that conversation was that, my mom said, look, these folks that are your peers, you grew up in the same neighborhood. Your parents have very similar backgrounds. You went to the same schools, right? You have very similar experiences. What makes them any different than you? I can't imagine, she said, that they're a lot smarter than you, right? And that was the, well, wait a minute, kind of puffed up there and said, wait a minute, of course they're not, but realizing that the reality of that simple question was motivation.
What am I going to do about it?
Motivation, the focus that my peers had, in contrast to maybe myself at the time. And that led me to develop a plan of action, right? I went back to the community college counselor and, said, hey, I need to get out of here. Like, I need a path here to finish my credits to be able to transfer because, that's what I want to do. And by then, I had taken enough classes in history and in political science that I had developed an interest in the area that began to connect me back to this experience at the age of 16 that I owe to this woman by the name of Isabel Castillon, who offered me and my best friend Carlos an opportunity to work at City Hall. And I see her every now and then. She's a probation officer in the Riverside County area. And you better believe that I thank her every time that I see her, because that was an amazing experience that led to what I get to do today, which is work in public service. I don't come from a political background. No one in our family ever ran for office. No one was involved in government or even told with the idea of being political, and so many times I get asked, "Hey, well, your parents?" Or no, the answer is no. My parents are hardworking, tax-paying, American citizens who came from another country for a better opportunity for their family, and God bless them for making that decision to come here and providing us with the opportunities that we have today.
So you ended up fast forwarding a little bit at UC Riverside.
I did.
Did you continue studying history and
I did.
science?
So when I transferred to UC Riverside, it's funny because I was now 24, 25 years old, right? I'm like the old guy on campus. Maybe not that old. Ronnie Dangerfield comes to mind, right? He goes back to school, right? But I'm the guy that's a little older, right? With other, classmates there that are 18, 19, that just graduated from high school. And so I'm there with a straight head on my shoulders, knowing what I want to do and understanding that I've already spent 4 years at community college, that I'm not here to spend another 4 years. I'm here to do my 2 years. If anything, maybe run for, pursue a graduate degree if the school thing seems to, work out, or go home. And at that time, my mindset began thinking about education and working in the education field, and knowing that there was a path for me to finish my undergraduate work, perhaps pursue a teaching credential or a master's in education with an emphasis in history, to be able to go back home and teach U.S. history, American government, Chicano studies, Native American studies, which is ultimately what I end up with a degree in political science from UC Riverside with 2 minors, both in Native American studies and Chicano studies. And Native American studies became a area of interest to me for 2 reasons. One, growing up in the Coachella Valley, we have a handful of Native American tribes that operate gaming facilities, and I was always curious to know why they could and why others couldn't. Mm-hmm. That's one. But the other, somewhere in between there, I was given an opportunity to do an internship in my first year at UCR with the Cabazon Band of Mission Indians in their government affairs department. And that experience opened up my eyes to an entire new world as it relates to sovereignty and what it means to be a tribal sovereign nation in the United States, and why it came about that sovereignty was bestowed upon our tribes, clearly understanding the history of what had happened to our Native Americans across this country as it relates to displacement, extermination policies, as well as just making sure that life was not made easy for Native Americans every step of the way as America became, the country that we are today. And so that experience, when I went back to school the next year, I wanted to learn more about that. I took history classes of Native Americans in California, issues related to sovereignty, water policy. And I also recognized that it was a unique area of study that for someone like myself to go back home, I could bring value and perhaps even work for one of these sovereign entities in our backyard to provide some type of guidance or insight to the work that could be done. And so there was some thought for a minute, and there was a lot of lobbying going on of myself to go and pursue a master's degree at UCLA with a woman by the name of Carol Goldberg and Duane Champagne, a master's degree with a law degree, with an emphasis on constitutional law in the Native American area. And there were offers that by the tribes that if you go pursue that, we'll help pay for it. You would come back and work for us.
Do you have Native American roots?
I don't. Aside from, being proud of my own, ancestral heritage that does go back to, the state of Nayarit, which is made up of Cora Indian, people. And so that's my great-grandparents. But Native American, as it relates to what we recognize today as sovereign, Indian tribes in California, in this country, I don't. But the interest was born because of, again, the circumstances back home, the Native American tribes, and then, of course, as we indulged into the history and understanding what had happened and what the circumstances were of the present day, I became interested. And so I eventually went back and did some work for the tribe early on when I graduated from UC Riverside, but it really intrigued me. And I'll tell you how it all kind of comes around, right? Full circle is that experience, my education from UC Riverside with an emphasis in that area. When I started teaching at the school district that I was a product of, and they learned that I had a background in Native American studies, they actually asked me to direct a program, a culture enrichment program with a Native American tribe, the Torres Martinez tribe, and their children, to make sure that we were providing the adequate services and educational opportunities to Native children at their reservation. So I was working there, and at the same time doing adult education classes for the school district, teaching U.S. citizenship preparation courses. Now, that's after I actually did some U.S. history teaching at Coachella Valley High School, which is where I graduated from in 1995. And so I had those opportunities to really go back and really begin my path of public service in the public education realm. But my education really prepared me for what was to come in the future as mayor of the city, as a council member.
You must have joined or been elected to the city council right on the heels of graduating university, right?
I was 26, 27 years old when I got elected to the city council.
And mayor at 29.
And then we ran for the elected mayorship 2 years later and was fortunate enough to be elected and first elected mayor for the city. Prior to that, it was a rotation system, so it was kind of a big deal. And one thing that I always like to talk about as a result of that experience is, the politics of the community were beginning to shift. You had an influx of young professionals moving back to town after having left to go to college and maybe started their professional journeys elsewhere. A lot of individuals like myself began to come back more or less on the same time. And so the demographics of the city, at least within the age range, became more evident in terms of young professionals really getting more involved. And so when I ran for office, I was speaking to a generation of folks that saw eye to eye with me as it relates to past and present circumstances of community dynamics and politics. And so we were speaking to a demographic, right, that we represented. And it's always kind of dawned on people to say, you were 27 when you were elected mayor. I said, I was, in a community that the median age was 25 years old at the time, right? Wow. And so it only made sense that there would be reflective representation at the time. But it wasn't easy. It certainly wasn't easy because there was a lot of things that were business as usual and a lot of resistance to allowing this kid who just got back from college, who is kind of idealistic and wanting to, change the world and start here at home, that it would not happen and it couldn't happen. And against all the odds, against all the money, and against all of the, status quo endorsements, we were able to win with a message of new ideas and new leadership, because there had been a regime that had been there for almost 2 decades. Mm-hmm. And our specific policy proposals were about responsible development. And what that encompassed was issues related to, if we're going to continue to grow at the pace that we're growing in this community, we need to make sure that our existing residents, as our new residents, benefit from this growth and development that's happening. That we do it in a much more conscientious manner, right, as it relates to amenities and public services, but that we're able to sustain, the growth that's happening, both financially and from a ecosystem perspective as well. We've got all this land that is being farmed, and that we be very mindful, right, that we just don't build out our city for the sake of building it out, and really have a tremendous impact on the existing ecosystem, meaning our ag communities, right, that provide us a tremendous amount of, jobs, at the same time, sustain our food chain system, but at the same time making sure that we had the amenities to be able to take care of existing residents and those coming in. In other words, that the community be built out in a way that everyone won, and it wasn't the case then. And one of the major issues that popped out that I cared about dearly was the issues of parks. And the issue of parks was at a central point of our campaign, because I grew up on these parks and I played sports on these parks. And when I got back from school, and not that I had left for a long time, so I was able to kind of see the activities that were going on in between, is that the population almost tripled and we still had the same acres of park space. Meaning that our park infrastructure was tremendously shot out, because they were just beat up, and there weren't new parks being built. There weren't any plans to build them. There weren't any refurbishments of existing parks. So I started hitting the issue of parks for our families and our kids, and it resonated with folks. And look, I mean, at the California legislature, I got to work on a statewide park bond, which is a really, really exciting thing for me, because it's really what was one of the main objectives when we first got elected to the city council.
Yeah, and it sort of comes full circle for you, and the work that you're doing on parks now, chairing the Parks Committee at a time nationally when national parks are really being decimated.
That's right. Whether it be, already a lack of investment and resources to a change of direction as it relates to the preservation of them, and or just the simple act of limiting access to some of the most precious national, parks that we have, and it intersecting with other interests that want to either build or dig or extract, right? And that's something that's extremely worrisome for some of us. And here at the state, very similar, right? How do those policies begin to infringe on our state's abilities to continue to provide these beautiful state parks to Californians and people from around the world that come here to enjoy our outdoor economy, that is an industry that makes up about $90 billion of our economy, along with employing about 600,000 people. So extremely important area for us, and we're certainly in a place, as we chair this committee that oversees parks and wildlife issues, to be able to weigh in on the policy decisions or direction that may be coming our way.
And now, a word from our sponsor. A special thanks to our sustainable business sponsor for the California Leadership Series, Lyft. Lyft is the fastest growing rideshare company in the U.S. and is available to 95% of the U.S. population. Now, all Lyft rides are carbon neutral. This means that a decision to ride with Lyft is a decision to take a cleaner option, cleaner than driving yourself or riding with another company, and will fund efforts that are reducing emissions and combating climate change. This is a multi-million-dollar investment in the first year alone, which makes Lyft one of the top voluntary purchasers of carbon offsets in the world. In year one, Lyft anticipates offsetting over 1 million tons of carbon, equivalent to planting tens of millions of trees or taking hundreds of thousands of cars off the road. Lyft's investment and impact will continue to grow as the company does. Ride Lyft and join together in effecting positive change for the future of our cities. To learn more, visit lyft.com/carbon. So before we move into the state government part of your career, you had a pretty unique path, and you talked about some very important seeds that were planted early on. What advice do you have to people who are interested in public service? And of course, this podcast has a sustainability slant, but in working in local government, you mentioned that it's not necessarily the path of going and studying political science and law. It could be that path. But what sort of have you observed in other careers as well as your own as pathways in?
Well, look, I once got interviewed about my work in the hospitality industry, and then my job or my role in public service. And I made a correlation, right? And in the hospitality industry, right, your responsibility is to take care of your guests, your customers, right? Making their experience a pleasant one and accommodating their every need that they have, right? And so I always talked about the skill sets that I was able to learn and obtain working in that field to apply them to the work that we do in public service, right? Our constituents, taking care of the constituents' problems, questions, concerns, and or furthering an idea that could perhaps enhance the experience or the circumstance in the community. I've always been a person, a people person. I've always been a person that likes to interact with others and see how we could be helpful. And I think I have those traits, and they come from my parents. I don't remember a time up until about, well, I can't even say that, still to this day. My parents, from the moment that they got here to this country, have always been there to help other members of our family. I was going to say that up until several years ago, but we have an uncle still that will stay at my parents' house occasionally as he's trying to make his place, the Coachella Valley, his home, and is employed locally. And so my parents have always helped somebody. I remember as a kid, there was always an uncle or an aunt or a cousin that I had never met before that my parents would say, they're going to be staying with us for a little while because they're going to be looking for a job, and we're going to help them get on their feet. And those simple characteristics and traits, I think, were passed on, like helping people. In this case, we were helping family, but we were helping folks get on their feet. Maybe a tough time, maybe not, but nevertheless, always finding a way to be there for others who needed a helping hand. And as I mentioned, there was always someone sleeping on the couch in that extra room that we had. There was always someone that we were meeting that was a new relative from someplace else that we had never met before, under the notion that we were helping them out for a few months until they got on their feet in this country and were on their own. And those are traits and characteristics that I think, as simple as they may seem, that you have to have in order to enter public service. Now, not everyone's going to run for office, but there are a lot of unique opportunities and fields to go into that make up public service. Nonprofit organizations, public education, administration in our local cities or counties, social services. I mean, there is a wide range of professional paths and opportunities, and I think it really boils down to, do you like to help people?
Mm-hmm.
Do you like
that service mentality?
Yeah. Do you like to be around people? Mm-hmm. And are you willing to sacrifice a little bit to help others, right? And really, I think those are just simple traits and characteristics that if you check the box on all those, then maybe that's an area of profession that you may be suited for. And I mean, that's a maybe simple way of saying it, but that's the framework.
Well, it cuts to the kind of the core values aspects of why people do service-oriented work.
Yeah,
and, I think that's great. Okay, so bring me then up to speed. You've now been serving in the Assembly for how many years?
So this is my fourth year.
Your fourth year.
My second term, right? The tail end of our second term. We spent 10 years in local government prior to coming up to the state legislature. Wow. It's been an exciting first two terms where we've been able to work on many major issues that are not just statewide and or nationally recognized, but that have a direct connection to issues in my own district. For some, sometimes difficult to make the connection, but it's not that difficult. When we're talking about clean air, we're talking about climate change. When we're talking about the water drought and the impacts on our economy, such as the ag economy, the hospitality economy, we're talking about climate change. When we're talking about investing into renewable energy and building more solar and wind and geothermal projects, We're talking about climate change mechanisms to meet our goals here in California. And we're talking about, endangered species, the Salton Sea, to be more specific. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about issues that intersect with the policies that we push for up here in Sacramento and that have a direct correlation to some of these very prevalent matters that exist in our district. And so, I oftentimes get asked by those who are not big climate change believers and or those who don't believe that there is an important role for me in that arena, why are you working on these issues? You should be working on jobs. And it's like, yes, increasing the RPS to 50%, or the debate that's going on to 100%, secures our opportunities to continue to bring investment to our district to create jobs in our area.
So let's talk about that specifically, because I know that you were chair of a select committee on renewable energy development. What sort of renewable energy businesses and jobs do you see being provided in your district in the Coachella Valley?
Well, we know that up and down the state of California, over 500,000 jobs have been generated in the clean tech industry, renewable energy arena, right? And in our area, the renewable energy investments that have created solar jobs, aside from vocational training opportunities and apprenticeships in those areas with our partners, have also led to greater investments in wind energy opportunities, both in Imperial and the Coachella Valley. And then one renewable resource that we have in abundance that is tied to Salton Sea mitigation efforts is the geothermal energy that the PUC has recently put forward a report that says we need more of that type of energy in order to stabilize our grid system.
Right, because it's constant load.
Exactly. So those are the types of jobs that have been generated in our area, aside from all of the ancillary jobs that come about those direct jobs. And so, employment or unemployment rates could be much higher in our area, which in Imperial County traditionally have been in the 20 percentiles. We are doing better. Not anything to jump out of our seat, but 14, 15% in comparison to 26% is a big difference.
It's a big difference.
And so, it's made a difference when it comes to our economic opportunities. These policies, for some, hard to make that connection, but the more opportunities we have, the more, I re-emphasize and connect those dots in the most simple way that I can, because it has made a difference as it relates to the economy in our district.
So one of the points of contention oftentimes in the environmental field, particularly in California, is water rights and the ag community. And you represent a predominantly agricultural district. And I'm noticing on your wall here that you have a Legislator of the Year award from the Pacific Water Quality Association. And I know that you've done a fair amount of work on the issue of water. Talk a little bit about that dynamic between ag and, I guess a question is do you see the agricultural community moving to a place where there's less tension over the water issue and maybe where they can be driving the solution?
So, look, what I have seen is a spirit of cooperation, certainly not without withstanding some resistance, but a spirit of cooperation that if we're going to do a better job in managing this precious resource that is limited in some areas of the state and certainly in abundance in others, that we're going to have to do this collectively in the interest of the resource, but also in the interest of the economy. And clearly without water, right, you have no ag. And so ag communities and their leaders have come to the realization that there are better ways of utilizing this resource to both be effective with their end goal, as well as be cooperative with the statewide goals and objectives. And we've seen a shift of attitude in moving in that direction. That being said, it doesn't change the dynamics, the politics that water, brings to the table. For example, there's currently a lawsuit in our backyard between the public utility that manages the public's water resources and farmers. Farmers wanting to make sure that water rights are tied to the land. So if you own this land, these acres, you are entitled to X amount of, acre feet of water. Where the argument the other way is, well, this is a public resource, and we as an agency have been bestowed, the powers of authority to manage it, and we set the policy on how much, how little, when, right, you receive this resource. And so there's a debate going on as it relates to, should it be kept that way, or should the water be tied to the land that these wells are located in, or what have you. There are other court debates going on with tribal water rights, right, and the management of groundwater in certain regions, and if it's being done responsibly, conscientiously, as well as in the best manner to be able to ensure that public health is not being put at risk, right? And so there's a challenge in that area. So there's still those types of debates in the courts, taking place to determine how best to proceed with water management and water use in California. It's not an easy area to navigate through, but I think when you stop and put what is the overall goal and objective here is to continue to have a thriving economy in these particular sectors without a doubt, but at the same time that we're conscientious of our limitations that exist. And when we talk about sustainability and climate change, that plays a huge factor into all of that.
Coming back to climate, you and I first met in Paris. And I actually remember a dinner where my weak Spanish, I was only able to pick up parts of it, but it was where you and a couple other legislators from California were meeting with, I believe, legislators from various Mexican states. And I believe the topic, or the convening topic, was reforestation and the potential for carbon credits here. I guess, what was that experience for you like in being in Paris in the middle of this historic agreement, which unfortunately since then the U.S. has retracted on? And what did it do, I guess, to inform, because you have since become one of the, and this is why we're really talking today, you've since become one of the real leaders on this issue in the California legislature. And I'm just wondering if that was a pivotal time for you or not.
I would say that it was, but it wasn't with that intention. It wasn't something that we had strategically mapped out and or put forward as, and this is where we want to be in the legislature as a champion on. And that's just speaking openly and honestly. I will tell you that how I end up in Paris is Speaker Atkins asking me to participate on this trip to begin a collaborative conversation with our counterparts in the Senate as it relates to how we would proceed with legislation that had failed that year. And because of my involvement in having or wanting to have a more robust conversation with Senator Pavley at the time and those other leaders of both houses who were wanting to push SB 32, I had raised the concerns about how economically disadvantaged communities that are disproportionately affected by environmental pollution played a role in the existing framework of policies that we implement, and that SB 32, by extending it, really just did more of the same. And so that involvement, I think, drew attention to an area that has been discussed and talked about that was in the original AB 32 public policy that was approved in 2006, but wasn't really coming to fruition. So I was saying, let's make sure that our climate change policies are equitable and that we apply them across the state to ensure that everyone is benefiting from them. And at the time, SB 32 didn't present that opportunity. So my dissension and the dissension of others led, I think, for the attention that we received and the marriage of two unique perspectives on the environment to come together in Paris at this international conversation, that we would come back with the understanding and impression of how important California's role is to the world and to this country. And when we came back committed to wanting to move public policy in the climate change space forward that would bring up the issues of disadvantaged communities up and down the state of California, and to look at it through the lens of how do we bring forward co-benefits, the co-benefits that ought to be considered in order to change circumstances in regions of the state like unemployment, for example, right? And I'm very grateful for Speaker Atkins choosing me to attend not just the kind of historical aspect of where we were at and what we were doing. We were presenting. I mean, I got to present a couple panels. That was not on the agenda when we arrived in Paris. There was an opportunity to speak to the issue of California technology and the clean sector and the jobs. There was opportunities to talk about the disadvantaged communities element. And there were similar conversations happening in this world stage about poor countries around the world saying, hey, we're all in for this. We're all in. But you know what? We need help. We need help. We need the investment to help us make that transition, because we're so dependent on the fossil fuel economy that we can't go from one day to another and decimate our economies and our jobs and our livelihoods in these poor countries without having a transitional just plan to move into a cleaner era in our country. And that resonated with me because that sounded like my message,
right,
about poor, disproportionately impacted, communities of California wanting to have a bigger role, but needing that support and seeing that investment being made with intention, right? With an intention to be able to change some circumstances there. So I came back better equipped and understanding what we were dealing with. Where up until that point, I have to be honest, I was on the city council. I was mayor when AB 32 was passed and SB 375. And, from a local government perspective, everyone was freaking out. Oh, my God, how are we going to comply? We're not going to be able to meet these goals. What are going to be the penalties? Oh, the cost on development, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you come from local government with a perception, this may not be that good in the bigger picture, right, to local communities. But quite on the contrary, it's proven that our green policies, our climate change policies have actually helped grow our economy in California, created jobs, and have made California a much more sustainable place and a model for the world and for this country.
So what's amazing to me about that story of, and thanks for sharing that, is that I am aware, sort of tangentially or peripherally, that these two issues of economic justice and climate change are coming together, and I really see the work that you've done in the legislature as driving that confluence. So if I can just sort of paraphrase what I'm hearing from you, though, is that the experience of being in Paris helped you to understand the global implications on the world's communities, not just California's communities, of climate change. And I'm assuming that gave you sort of fire in your belly to work on climate, but you didn't ever once lose sight of bringing these issues of economic disparity and justice, environmental justice, to the table.
It was the opportunity to raise profile on the environmental justice issues that have been prevalent up and down the state in specific regions of the state, and really marry the conversation from the perspective of we can do both, we should be doing both, because they're both just as important. And it was by bringing forward very specific examples of what was happening in my district and connecting the dots to the larger climate change conversation happening in the state that I think we were able to collectively, successfully extend the SB 32 targets that brought forward market certainty and a path for us to then begin on what would be the next phase of work, which would be an extension of a cap and trade program that at the core of both the cap and trade program and the targets, the SB 32 efforts, we were able to integrate a greater element of the environmental justice piece to all of this that I believe, and many others would agree, have helped move the conversation in a direction that needed to be had.
Are we there yet? Is it? Are you happy with sort of that fusion between environmental justice concerns and climate policy, or do we still have a long ways to go?
I'm happy with the intersection that we are at, but we are now at an implementation phase, right? It's outcomes that we need to produce. It's the investments in air quality action plans to address some of these areas that are, again, hit the hardest, and that we're able to implement and see measurable outcomes in the coming years, right? So we're at the implementation phase now that we have to aggressively, roll out and watch some outcomes, and at the same time, take a look at the other benefits, hopefully, that come from that. Are we creating more jobs in those regions and improving those circumstances? Are we putting, low-income families into cleaner vehicles, right? And providing the necessary infrastructure for that to happen in these areas of the state? Are our transportation systems becoming greener via, technologies that may be available to have cleaner trucks driving through our freeways that are driving through these communities by the ports or very busy commerce goods movement, corridors of the state? Are we seeing better outcomes within public health? Are our asthma rates amongst children going down in specific communities that are disproportionately impacted by pollution in the air? And so those are the things that we need to see, right? And then you can ask me, is it working or are we there yet? We're getting there. Okay. But the fact that the conversations are happening collectively, it's been a major win for the environmental justice community and the overall environmental community for California.
So you have, in this conversation, described so many different things that I think drive your work, right? From the kind of the core sense of service to a sense of history with the education you received and your own family history, to more recent kind of awakenings around climate and renewable energy and water and so on. If you were to sum up today why you're doing the work that you do, what would you say? Well,
look, I have a 3-year-old little girl. I have a 14-year-old son and a 14-year-old stepdaughter. That although I think all parents worry and want to make sure that they leave a place with greater opportunities for their children, it really boils down to those very basic fundamentals. And when we're talking about this work in the climate or environmental work, it's about leaving a better place for them too, right? It does no good to leave them with, the opportunities for a good education and a good path for them to become, responsible Americans who pay their taxes and do all the right things to be successful. But we have a responsibility to also leave a environment that is conducive to all of those other things that I just mentioned. And, we have a responsibility to them and to future generations. And I know that it sounds cliche-ish to folks. It's like, well, we have to, take care of Mother Nature, Mother Earth for the next generations. But that's the reality of it. That's the reality of it. We're seeing, we are in times where, these sea rises are serious in communities that live along the coast. They're devastating to communities, dangerous to say the least. These fires that we've seen are as a result of, the earth getting hotter. I come from a very hot place of the state. It's 110, 15 degrees already. And yet a month ago it was in the 70s. That's unusual. That's not normal. And it causes different types of impacts, not just on human health, but on the economics of the state. I'm telling you, we have an ag economy that these weather patterns that are off the charts impact their ability to provide a sustainable, plan to continue growth of their fruits and vegetables that the entire world depends on, right? And so there are serious implications of doing nothing or staying on the path of trying to mitigate, minimize, and prepare for these unknown emergencies and circumstances. This water drought that impacted the state for 5-6 years. Communities that literally had no water coming out of their faucets. I mean, that's all connected to it. The impact that has on families, on children, is really devastating. So that's why this work is important. And we'll continue to, be on the forefront of making sure that our climate change policies are equitable and that they're benefiting everyone, and ultimately that we continue to lead this country and in the world to make sure that we do have a better place for our future generations to come.
Beautiful. Thank you. One last question. You've had a remarkable career so far, joining or being elected to city council when you were 26, 27.
That's correct.
Mayor at 29, serving in the California legislature for the last 4 years. How do you see your future and maintaining, hopefully, to make the sorts of impacts that you're making?
Well, look, I often stop and think that based on many of the experiences and circumstances that I have faced, and I recognize that many things could have led me not to be here. In fact, sometimes I wonder, and I have folks that joke about this, close friends of mine say, I can't believe you're the assembly member, right? I can't believe it, and for their own reasons, right? And then you'll have other folks, and I can't believe that you are working on these issues, that these are extremely important issues globally, nationally, and that's Eddie doing that, is kind of the response. That's Eddie doing that. And I just get a chuckle, right? Because, yeah, sometimes I step back and say, wow, that's kind of cool. And that I was given this opportunity. And thanks to folks giving us, I always refer to as 3 or 4 second chances at doing what we get to do, both on a personal and on a professional level, I don't take it for granted. I don't take it for granted. And so I think I'm where I need to be. I believe I'm where I need to be. And we have an opportunity to be in this role as a state assembly member for about 12 years. And we're not halfway there yet. And so I'm not antsy, anxious, or motivated to think about what's next on the political spectrum. What I am looking forward to and committed is to continue in this role, to serve out the tenure of this opportunity, and hopefully use this experience and opportunity to motivate others to engage in this area of work, to continue to see the ever-evolving environmental face changing. It's a diverse state, and the policies and those who are working on these policies should look like the state. Therefore, we can ensure that all of the state has a seat at the table and is really benefiting from these opportunities, and also putting forward solutions to the problems. My ultimate goal would be to serve in the California legislature the remainder of the terms that are available. I am very interested in academia. I am very interested in, as one would say, taking the show on the road. I've had a unique opportunity and invitations to be guest lecturers. Most recently, Purdue University, where I spoke to professors, researchers, students, and the community there about the work happening in California, to USC Environmental Law program, where we also got to shed light on the insights and of crafting policy and working in collaboration with many stakeholders to move these policies forward, to the invitation from Yale University, where I understand is really where the idea of many of these policies was born, by some ambitious group of folks who saw a system or a mechanism to be able to put forward sound environmental policies that could also generate opportunities for greater investments in this arena. So I'm very interested in the academia world, and I envision myself as an older gentleman, older man with my briefcase, walking into or stepping onto a college campus, and with the same energy and enthusiasm, I hope, to be able to talk about these things in a contemporary, framing, but also from a historical perspective on how we get there, and hoping that not just for my own personal and professional gain, meaning a job after my world in the assembly, but to be able to motivate and stimulate some critical thinking around the issues, and maybe produce some individuals who will choose to move in this path as a professional career or opportunity.
That's great. Well, Assemblymember, thank you so much for taking the time with us today, and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to sharing a little bit about what we get to do in the state legislature, a little bit about ourselves, and certainly some of the things that have led us to this place, which I drive to in the morning. And again, as I said earlier, I get a kind of chuckle every now and then and say, I have an office in that beautiful building. What an honor and a privilege it is to serve the people that I represent in the Coachella and Imperial Valleys, and of course, California. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again to the Sustainable Business Partner for the California Leadership Series, LIFT. To learn more about LIFT's carbon neutral program, visit lift.com/carbon. The Sustainability Leaders Podcast is a resource of Jobs with Impact. Our engineer and associate producer is Ian Swanky. Theme music is also by Ian Swanky. I'm David Rosenheim. If you like the show, please rate and review us on iTunes or your preferred platform. And be sure to tell your friends and colleagues who want to make a difference. Thanks for listening. See you next week.